And you would say, in your own words, that John would bully people. Do
Yeah,
you feel
100%. I would
unsafe
say that
around him?
comfortably to anybody. Around John?
Yes.
Yeah?
I'm going to speed run this intro because every second of this video matters and is condensed to contain as much juicy information as possible. I have new evidence, new insight, and new information about the Tainted Minds situation. I have reasons to believe that Tainted Minds have broken numerous laws that could subject them to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines and even potentially jail time. This particular video's main focus is on the work health and safety laws that were broken by Tainted Minds and why they're important to be acknowledged for future players and the community alike. This video is not monetized. In order for you to understand the gravity and severity of my claims, you'll need to watch the entire video. It will be worth your time. I'm going to keep speed running through the beginning until we get to the new information, but we still need to set the foundation. For those of you unfamiliar with the Tainted Mind situation, a general synopsis is difficult to explain because the situation is so thoroughly complex. However, on a basic level, this situation is about a professional League of Legends team in Australia whose organization was accused of horribly mistreating and deceiving the players, the coach, and the manager of the team. After the Riot Oceanic ruling on the Tainted Minds organization was made public, I began doing my own research into the situation. Like many of you, I was mad that Tainted Minds was let off so lightly, especially when we all suspect more went on behind the scenes. The more I thought about it, the more research I did, the more I began to feel that I was missing the big picture and the community as a whole was missing the big picture on the situation. Riot Games, Riot Oceanic, Tainted Minds, these are just businesses. Riot Games is not a sovereign, all-powerful entity. It's a business that has to function within the laws of the governing land. By us accepting Riot's ruling and letting the issue die there, we're essentially treating Riot Games and Riot Oceanic as if they are a legitimate governing power with the best interests of the people or players in mind. And sure, Riot has a lot of control over the organizations that play in its leagues, but they aren't and shouldn't be the ultimate legal power. They're a business, and unfortunately, businesses don't always have the best interests of people in mind. That's where the law comes in. So Riot Oceanic makes public their Tainted Minds ruling and their reasoning, and one of the reasons for coming down so lightly in the organization is that, quote, "We have heard directly from the players involved. They did not feel unsafe or at risk at the house, and communications between players and Riot Oceanic team members at the time confirmed the same." This is completely untrue, and I will prove in this video that not only were there valid health and safety concerns, but that Tainted Minds was responsible under law for the health and safety of everyone in that house. Over the past few weeks, I've spent a lot of time researching laws and regulations within the regions of Australia, combing through evidence and uncovering some new information, and I want to share with you what I found. Before I get too far ahead of myself, though, I need to state some things. I'm not a practicing lawyer in Australia. I just want to share with you my opinions on the topic, and my opinions based on the laws we're going to talk about and discuss in this video, involving the player testimony as well, and the interviews that they've done, and the information they posted online, the screenshots, all of this put together. And we're just going to talk some hypotheticals about how this all relates to the Tainted Mind situation. Okay, so we're going to have to make 3 assumptions on this case for the foundation that we build everything on. First assumption, we're assuming the players, the coach, and the manager's testimonies are true when it comes to the living conditions in the gaming house and their interactions with the Tainted Minds upper management. I've talked with parties involved. I've read all the testimonies, articles, and interviews posted online. I've seen, read, watched, talked with as many sources as I could find. And I believe that these testimonies are true. There are plenty of screenshots, photos, and videos that support their testimonies. The second assumption, we're assuming that the gaming house was a workplace and that the players, coach, and manager were considered workers. This one is obvious to me, but a lot of the law hinges on this fact being acknowledged by the Australian government, which I believe would agree that this was indeed a workplace. In the letters of engagement sent to the players, it stated that they were required to live and practice in the gaming house. While the contracts that they eventually signed did not have language that specifically stated word for word what was in the letter of engagement, I do think the letter of engagement showed Tainted Minds' intent. Under Australian law, a workplace is a place where work is carried out for a business and includes any place where a worker goes or is likely to be at while at work. The Work Health and Safety Act of 2011 for New South Wales defines a worker as the following. A person is a worker if the person carries out work in any capacity for a person conducting a business or undertaking. This would include independent contractors as protected in this act as long as they were expected to be at the workplace, aka the gaming house. Third assumption, We're assuming that because the gaming house itself is located in New South Wales, it's those work safety regulations that Tainted Minds would have to follow. Businesses in Australia generally have to obey the laws and regulations in regions they operate within. Work. One of the most important laws to my argument is the Work Health and Safety Act of 2011, number 10, of New South Wales government in Australia. The main object of this act is to provide a balanced and nationally consistent framework to ensure the health and safety of workers and workplaces by, and I quote, protecting workers and other persons against harms to their health, safety, and welfare through elimination or minimization of risk from work or from specified types of substance or plant, and providing for fair and effective workplace representation, consultation, cooperation, and issue resolution in relation to work health and safety. I need to state that Tainted Minds is a business to the equivalent of an LLC, a limited liability company. Being an LLC, a limited liability company, may limit in capacity some civil lawsuits and the financial reach involving, but it doesn't put the company outside of the governing laws of the land. I think the gaming house that Tainted Minds players practice in is most definitely considered a workplace because they were expected to practice there and work was conducted at the location. This Work Health and Safety Act doesn't just apply to dangerous construction jobs or jobs in factories. This act also applies to desk jobs or just about anything else that has a workplace and workers, whether they might be full-time workers, temporary workers, or foreign contract workers. They're still protected by this law if the workers and businesses are operating in Australia, or in this case, New South Wales.
Like they just didn't, like, it felt like they didn't listen to me. Because every time I would try and give them, like, I'd approach them with an issue, I'd give them a day to 2 days to respond, business time, whatever else. And then it'd come to the end of the week and nothing would have happened with the issue. And then Nick would have to call them, the coach, and be like, what the fuck is happening? And then they would drop everything and try and panic fix it. It's like they didn't respect what I said or think that I was good enough or like what I said wasn't worth it. The fact that, I don't know, the whole thing was awful. The fact that I had to ask for a dinner table, like, already put things on a bad foot. Like, and none of this was communicated to me. So when I ask for a table and they go, oh, we'll have to think about it and talk about it with upper management, we expected you to eat at your computers, like, it's just really bad. And then I had the same thing. They bought something like 60 plates, right? 60 like plates. And I'm like, why the fuck do we have so many plates? He's like, oh, because I know in my house plates get left around. I'm like, what the fuck? What the fuck is this?
And you got
disgusting.
A dishwasher at the house, did you?
No dishwasher.
You never got a dishwasher?
Nope. That ended up being, that space that was for the dishwasher ended up being where they put the washing machine and dryer.
So you did all the dishes yourself?
So we had a washing machine and, yeah, I did, yeah. I cooked and cleaned and did everything.
Yeah, that's easy.
Because, yeah.
8 hours. Oh.
I don't know, I was just too much in fear of, like, the players wanting to leave. So I just tried to pick up wherever I could to make sure that they didn't leave. So, like, the fact that, they were already unhappy that stuff wasn't happening, I just decided to pick up cooking and cleaning.
Something extremely important to note in this act is that physical health and safety is not the only thing protected under the Australian work safety laws. Psychological health is also included under this Work Safety Act's definition of health. This takes everything to another level. As I present the player testimony, the screenshots, the photos, and the Australian work safety laws and other laws, remember that the psychological health of workers is protected under this act alongside physical health and safety by law. Let's look at the health and safety concerns in our case. I think the biggest health and safety concerns are the lacking air conditioner during the Australian summer, rampant electrical problems, failure for upper management to provide groceries for a 10-day period, and poor sanitation in the gaming house. Let's remember all the testimony that Cake posted in his TwitLonger about the living conditions of the house. They were told by Tainted Minds that the house was ready. When the Tainted Minds players started moving in, Cake moved in around December 4th, he stated the house was filthy and walking around would make your feet turn black. The air conditioning wasn't working and wasn't fixed for the first time until January 16th, more than a month with absolutely no consistent air conditioning in Australia as it was ramping up to be a massive heat wave. 2 people in the house didn't even have doors in their bedrooms, and they had no method of doing laundry in the house. The air conditioning problems continued even after January 16th because ongoing electrical problems in the house, including during the time period when Australia was hit by a massive heat wave in February. It appears that the sanitation issues were ongoing according to the testimony. Cake, Choo Choo's, Rosie, and Nero, the coach of the team, Fast Fee, the player manager, they all publicly agreed that there was no air conditioning for long periods on end, mold problems in the house, garbage piling up because there was nowhere to put it since they only had one trash bin, sanitation problems, and electrical problems. These testimonies make it clear that the players did have health safety concerns since the very beginning, and it was ignored by Riot and belittled by Tainted Minds. The Riot Oceanic ruling continues to confuse me, as because before and even after the ruling, multiple testimonies from those who lived in the house continued to surface, completely contradicting the ruling on the health and safety topic, which makes you wonder how much Riot actually cares about the health and safety of players.
That's another thing. Like, we went and we said that to Riot, right?
Yeah.
And, like, they're allowed to come inspect a property within, 24 hours if they want to. Give the, notice to Tainted Minds and say, hey, we're going to check out the property and have a look at it. They can do that. And they decided that they would pair that up with a filming crew of Riot. Because we had filming come in the same week that we were trying to, contact Riot for help. And they were like, yeah, we'll come out, we'll do an inspection. Somebody will be out there and blah, 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 blah. And then we find out later that they just decided to take the video crew's word on how the house was, how the condition was. There was nothing actually looked into by a writer in terms of the house. They just came in, they filmed, and then they filmed outside and they left.
Yeah,
that counted as an inspection, a house inspection.
I remember that was stated in the ruling, and also I think one of the Twitlongers. It's just ridiculous.
Existence is torment.
Not having properly working air conditioning and high temperatures and humidity is an ongoing physical and psychological nightmare. I know this from personal experience, and maybe you might too. It's hard to concentrate on basic things in that type of situation, let alone learn new concepts and practice. Just existing in that environment would be torturous. I've never even experienced the heights of temperatures that Australia can reach in their summertime. I can only imagine my worst experiences with air conditioning magnified and persistent for almost 3 months. Throughout that time period, New South Wales was hit by different heat waves that varied in temperatures from 35 degrees Celsius to 48 degrees Celsius. In a Twitlonger, Choo Choo's and other players on the team said the following in regards to the time experienced in February, and I quote, "We lived in a gaming house only to sleep in intense heat and wake up in unplayable internet. We were just sitting in the computer room talking and trying to resolve issues. That day we had 12 power outages, each taking turns going out into 48 degrees Celsius heat to restart the power." If your country is stubborn like mine and hasn't switched to the metric system, then you'll need to know that 48 degrees Celsius is 118.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And to top it off, it was extremely humid. That's a crucial point to this situation because there's a clear difference between just extremely hot and dry heat versus extremely hot and humid weather. Our body's cooling system is based on our ability to sweat. Dry heat doesn't interfere with our ability to sweat or with the sweat drying on our skin, which is the primary way that sweating cools us. However, when it's extremely humid, high temperature heat, then our bodies can still sweat, but the sweat won't dry on our skin as efficiently and won't cool the body properly. Now, at least 3 of the people in the house were not native to Australia. Cake, Shorter Ace, and Nero. They came because of the contracts with Tainted Minds. They were absolutely not acclimatized to intense Australian summer heat. It was snowing when Cake was leaving Canada for Australia. Heat acclimatization is very important to discuss because if the human body is not adjusted to intense heat, then it is even more susceptible to heat illnesses and diseases, and even mortality can be the ultimate result. It takes time for our body to get used to a new climate. Aside from physical safety concerns around heat acclimatization, there's psychological elements here too. If you're not used to these kinds of ludicrously high temperatures with humidity, then it feels even more unbearable than it would with someone who's been experiencing the heat for most of their life. These concerns absolutely should have been accounted for by Tainted Minds' upper management, with their response time in handling air conditioning and electrical problems.
Is it hot in here? Is it just me?
Back in 2010, Mike McGeehan, the director of Center for Disease Control's Environmental Hazards and Health Effects Program in the United States, spoke in an interview about how extreme waves affect the human body and potential risk associated with them. He said, "The other major factor in terms of temperatures that causes both mortality and morbidity is the temperature that it falls to in the evening. If the temperature remains elevated overnight, that's when we see an increase in deaths. The body becomes overwhelmed because it doesn't get the respite that it needs." Communications to Fast Feet and the players in the gaming house from upper Tainted Minds management became more sporadic after early remedies to the living conditions failed. In this Skype conversation, you can see Fastfy informing Joshua, Tainted Minds' public relations manager, that many of the players were having trouble sleeping due to the intense heat. This was in December, and they had no working air conditioner until January 16th, and no consistent air conditioning throughout the rest of their time in the house due to ongoing electrical issues. You might be thinking, but Valkrin, in that screenshot, Tainted Minds bought some fans for the team. They're trying their best to make the situation better. I'm glad you brought that up. Mike McGinn also said this in the very same interview about heat waves. Not only does it not work in reference to fans in really hot temperatures, but it actually makes it worse. We compare it to a convection oven. By blowing hot air on a person, it heats them up rather than cools them down. Great job, Tainted Minds. You might have made it worse with the fans, both literally and figuratively. Mike goes on to say that society has evolved in dealing with heat, and that has become the development of air conditioners. The number one factor that ameliorates death or illness from heat is access to air conditioning. The focus from upper management absolutely should have been on fixing the air conditioning and electrical problems, and yet those long-standing issues were never remedied, and Tainted Minds just tried to shift the blame onto the landlord. Here's a random tweet I found from the region of Australia in February during the major heat wave. So hot, the concrete melted my sneakers and gave me second-degree burns all over the soles of my feet. Australian flag emoji, sun emoji, shoe emoji, fire emoji, footprint emoji, pan emoji. In 48 degrees Celsius weather in New South Wales, Australia, the concrete would heat up to about 51 degrees Celsius, and that's 123.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Did you ever play the game The Floor is Lava when you were a kid?
Floor is lava. Yeah. Floor is lava.
In New South Wales, Australia, during a heat wave, the concrete might as well have been lava. I could not find specifics on temperature guidelines in Australia, but I did find a chart for the United States work safety guidelines for businesses and high temperatures and environments. If these players were put into an indoor environment that had little to no respite from extreme heat, then their bodies could not adequately recover, putting them at an even higher risk of heat-related health issues. Not to mention the misery of trying to practice and improve and succeed in such a detrimental environment. We're talking about young adults here. Typically the healthiest category of people and the least likely to succumb to heat illnesses, but that doesn't justify putting them at risk and jeopardizing their good health and safety because of negligence or indifference to the situation. I mean, look at this screenshot. This is a correspondence from Nick, the CEO of Tainted Minds from before the players moved into the gaming house. At least we'll have air conditioning in the house, right? Haha, yeah, of course.
I detect the presence of scum.
This conversation not only promised there would be air conditioning in the future house, but it also has Nick, the CEO of Tainted Minds, acknowledging the dangers of humidity and heat in Australia. Even though this conversation seemed to be in a joking manner, it clearly shows Tainted Minds' upper management made a promise for air conditioning, and at the same time acknowledged heat problems and risks that Australia was currently facing and would potentially be facing in that summer. Tainted Minds eventually provided 2 smaller working AC units that were used in the room with all the computers, the TV, and the players. Fastfy has told me specifically that these units were not effective at all. After practice was over, she remembered the players would still leave the practice room uncomfortably drenched in sweat. The most enraging part of this conversation is when Vulture states, "It's not viable for us to buy an AC for every bedroom, especially considering summer is almost over. If the members of the house would like anything additionally in the house to help with the heat, that is also an optional choice that would need to come out of their own pocket." Okay, so let's talk about the first part in that screenshot from Vultress. It's not viable for us to buy an AC for every bedroom, especially considering summer is almost over. There were forecasts that a massive heat wave was coming from even months prior. On November 30th, Enero, the coach, inquired over Skype about air conditioning in the house because he saw the advance notices of the impending heat waves of the summer. The Bureau of Meteorology in Australia had been issuing heat wave warnings in anticipation for massive, record-breaking heat waves in February. Fastfy and the other players knew about the heat wave and asked Tainted Minds for assistance. I think it's hard for Tainted Minds to pretend like they didn't know about an impending heat wave when it was all over the news, that a huge heat wave was coming, and it was a historic, record-breaking heat wave as well.
As predicted, over the weekend we had record heat through eastern Australia. There are too many towns to mention, so I apologise if I miss your town, but here's an example of some locations that recorded their hottest day on record, not just for February, for any month.
We're talking temperatures that native Australians who are acclimatized to heat are deeply concerned about. And yet, Tainted Minds doesn't seem to care or take precautions to help the situation. Let's talk about the second part of this screenshot. If the members of the house would like anything additionally in the house to help with heat, I don't know why that's there, that is also an optional choice that will need to come out of their own pocket. At this point, not all of the players had been fully paid what was owed to them. Cake has still stated that he's missing his December payment. Ryan, Shorter Ace, wasn't paid his signing bonus in full, according to his contract and according to his own testimony. How can you even ask something like this of the players or anyone in the house when they haven't been fully paid? I think this shows that Tainted Minds is displaying reckless behavior. They're showing that they don't care about the players, and they're ignorant about their responsibilities as an organization.
Okay, so with this grocery delivery thing, this plays into the 10 days without groceries, right? And they weren't being very responsive. Yeah. I remember Ryan was like asking for groceries in chat, and no one was responding. And then like someone finally responded, and they were like, "A little initiative goes a long way."
That's a beautiful meme now.
I know. It's like you could just use it against them. It's like for everything they ever said or did in this entire scenario, you could just say that same statement back to them.
Yep.
Eternal life, endless torture.
So during this fiasco where the players just didn't have groceries for 10 days, you were, I'm guessing, holding out and hoping that Tainted Minds would either recognize you more, pay you more, do more, or expect less of you so you could get another job or something like that. At this point in time, how could the players get food? Like, in other words, like in relation to the house, there was like a McDonald's nearby or something like that. Was there a grocery store nearby? Like, what was the geographical like?
Yeah, so there was a lot of fast food places across the road. They actually had a good amount of fast food. The KFC, McDonald's, chicken one, Hoarders, I think, and then they had a Subway, all just across the road, like under 5-minute walk. You just had to cross the road essentially. And then there was also a service station on the top of the street and at the bottom of the street, or essentially one in the same like area where all the food is, and then one at the bottom of the street. So there was ways to get food, but like it's just not the right food for the budget that they were given. If they were expected to do that, like it's going to take out of their budget so that they won't have food and have to pay out of their pocket for like the end of the month.
Right. They couldn't afford it. Like they couldn't even afford fast food with that budget for 7 people. Right.
Right. Not for 3 meals a day, no.
And the only way to hit that mark was, essentially groceries and cooking and preparation and cleaning and stuff like that.
Well, for them to have a healthy balanced diet, yes.
Tainted Minds had a contractual agreement with the players, the coach and the manager, and were required to provide a food budget of 2,000 Australian dollars a month. As a side note, according to FastFeed, the manager, prior to the food budget being fully finalized, it was initially set as 1,000 Australian dollars a month until FastFeed fought and argued with Tainted Minds' upper management to increase it for the players, coach, and manager in the gaming house. $2,000 a month for a food budget of 7 people. That comes out to roughly $3 a meal for each person, or $9 per day, which is not exactly easy to budget with unless someone is able to plan and cook in bulk. FastFeed said this wasn't an option due to the limited space in the freezer and refrigerator. No solution was presented by Tainted Minds to help with bulk cooking or storing of the food. In January, there was a period of time in which the players did not have groceries and did not have a way to receive groceries for 10 days. It started in part because FastFeed was not being paid what she was owed. The only way the players had been able to get groceries up until this point was through her and her vehicle. When Tainted Minds wasn't paying her and began bullying her into signing a much worse contract, she stopped some of the extra work she had previously been doing in hopes that she would either start getting paid what she was owed, or they would lessen her workload so that she could get a second job just to safeguard her livelihood. That's just ridiculous. You see, Tainted Minds had an unfair deal with her, and they were unwilling to change. She was required by her contract to work a minimum of 15 hours a week, but in order for her to work and get paid for more hours than that, she had to have it pre-approved by Tainted Minds. Tainted Minds neglected to provide for the team in many different capacities, which left FastFeed to pick up the slack. This, of course, resulted in her needing to work way more than 15 hours a week. But Because the extra work was not specifically requested or approved by Tainted Minds, they didn't want to pay for it. It's no surprise she wasn't happy with this arrangement, as it would sometimes take days just to get a response to a health and safety concern, let alone something they cared nothing about, like paying her or pre-approving more paid hours. They were taking advantage of her, to say the least. They were expecting her to be the glue that keep this situation from completely falling apart on only 15 paid hours a week. She was doing their laundry at laundromats with her own money. She was shopping for groceries, cooking, cleaning, driving the team to a LAN center 40 minutes away when there was no other way to practice. And to top it off, she was the biggest advocate for the player's safety in the situation. And she was doing it all while not getting fully paid in her contract. That was clearly illegal. Going back to the particular situation in January, FastFee wanted what she was owed for the extra hours she had been working. And when Tainted Minds refused, she decided to stop doing more than what was required of her in the contract until the organization agreed to pay her for the extra work. It only makes sense. Of course, problems quickly mounted because Tainted Minds had no system in place to actually keep order. To put into perspective how reluctant Tainted Minds were to pay FastFee for her extra work and just how disrespectful and spiteful they were towards her, just before the grocery incident, FastFee had offered to do the player's laundry at a laundromat across the street, provided that she would be paid for that and for the extra hours she had already worked. Instead of paying her, Tainted Minds temporarily hired a random stranger to do the player's laundry at the same laundromat and paid the stranger in full immediately.
Okay. And besides you, so okay, let's say when they fired you, they tried to do some sort of grocery delivery service thing, right?
Yeah. Well, they didn't fire me. They had that. They started to put that in place when I stopped working and bringing the food and cooking and stuff like that. So they were essentially trying to prove that they didn't need me to do those things so that they didn't have to pay me.
And it didn't work right.
Did you read the part about where they got some guy to pick up the laundry?
Yeah, and he lost stuff and he showed up without a car.
No, yeah, well, yeah, he showed up with a car for one, but they literally paid him to pick it up and bring it across the road, overpaying me.
Wow.
Yeah, this is how petty they were. Exactly how petty they were. They would rather pay a stranger than pay their own manager.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
The players were not comfortable with a stranger doing their laundry, especially when the person was losing their clothing. Tainted Minds were willing to put this spiteful situation with FastFee at a higher level of importance than even the player concern. I think Tainted Minds' pettiness turned into a game of chicken between FastFee and Tainted Minds, channeled through the topic of groceries for the players. I think Tainted Minds was hoping to take advantage of her sympathies for the players and have her continue to go back to this ludicrously large workload with no pay. FastFee was doing the job of 3 people at least and keeping the situation from completely falling apart, and yet she would have gladly gone back to it if they had just paid her some of the $8,000 a year salary in her contract, acknowledged the overtime she was working. Yes, her salary was 8,000 Australian dollars a year, more work than any one person should ever be responsible for in this situation, and the salary was 8,000 Australian dollars a year. What an incredible bargain for an organization within League of Legends having someone so motivated to work 3 jobs in one position for 8,000 Australian dollars a year. But they decided to squander it by just trying to get away with not paying her at all. During the 10-day period of no groceries, Tainted Minds upper management did set up an online grocery account, but they gave no budget instructions or help in planning around the budget. The players did not know how much money was left on their monthly budget for food. When the players tried to inquire on how much money was left for them to spend for groceries that month, they were met with no response for days. The players did not know what to do, considering pre-ordering groceries on a tight budget takes precise planning, and they'd never used a system like this before. None of the players were comfortable with budgeting and planning groceries and meals for the whole house, as this had never been a responsibility that was meant for them. When they asked for help from Tainted Minds, they were met with passive-aggressive comments such as this screenshot. By not paying FastFee, showing no intention to do so, and being unwilling to provide a good situation to issues raised, Tainted Minds created a dangerous situation, a very dangerous situation, in which there was no immediate system in place to procure food for the players. There was an agreement and expectation for Tainted Minds upper management to provide and facilitate this crucial necessity. Tainted Minds could have ordered the groceries for the house if they cared enough. They could have planned the first online order and let the house members handle the reordering once there was a workable precedent. At the very least, they could have provided an error with budget information. They didn't. They chose not to pay fast fee. They chose to create a situation in which the players would not have groceries for a time. This is compounded with the fact that Tainted Minds controlled and held the food budget, and Tainted Minds was behind on payments to some players, and the players did not have a method of transportation out of fast fee. Oh, did I mention that one of the players was under 18? Pradith, the top laner for the team, was 17 years old, not legally an adult, on top of serious implications of subjecting a minor to this and other major health concerns. Think about the experiences of a typical person of this age range. Do you really think any of the players would know the first thing about planning a large food order that everyone in the house would need to live off of on a mystery budget?
Endless misery.
Was that the only bad conversation you've had with upper management, that you felt bullied or you felt like they disrespected you in some way?
The whole time. And I've got another email from John when I was asking them to help with removing rubbish from the premises. Oh, it was bad. I pretty much was like, so the 17-year-old was moving in the next week.
Yes.
And I was like, guys, we still have all of this rubbish. What do you want me to do with this rubbish? I can't get rid of it. Blah, 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 blah. And then I got mistakenly CC'd into a response from upper management to John. And it's John replying going, what the fuck? Am I their parents? And I'm just asking them to remove rubbish from the premises so that the house looks good for this 17-year-old kid and his parents to walk into. And then that's the kind of response. So this is the way they talk about us behind our back, obviously.
Remember, it was stated by the players that there was mold, trash building up, and that upon moving in, and I quote, if we walked barefoot in the house, our feet would turn black. Fastfee states the following in her testimony online. After getting someone with a floor cleaning machine to go through the place, that was coming off the floor, 2 buckets worth of literal black water. I also then cleaned it the next day with a bucket and mop, which I had to buy myself, to empty a bucket like this in every room. This is clearly a problem with the living conditions of the house that Tainted Minds claimed was ready for players to move into, and this directly affects the health of the players. The evidence of these claims here is unfortunately fairly circumstantial, and without proper inspection or even more photos to surface, it's very difficult to prove the severity of the sanitation issues or mold within the house. That doesn't mean that this topic should be ignored, it's just simply put, this would be the hardest issue to prove to the Australian government without them having done an inspection. Mold should not be taken lightly, though. There are different types of mold with greater or less health concerns, but without a doubt, mold is still absolutely a health concern. Health and safety organizations strongly advise removing mold as soon as possible. Mold is something that doesn't have as much research done for it as other health concerns do, but more and more information is coming out from recent studies that could suggest that mold is an even bigger health risk than it was previously thought to be. It's been found that in some individuals, mold can adversely affect a wide range of things, including memory, concentration, and even cause respiratory illnesses. Anecdotally, I know someone personally whose relative has toxic mold poisoning. She developed the illness while working a desk job in which the office building was affected by mold. Her life and health has been severely affected. She's currently taking legal action in the US against her employer, but in her case, she developed a clear illness from it, and the evidence of mold is well documented. Australian law also protects workers from the failure of the employer or business to prevent or minimize health concerns in the workplace. As far as I know, no one in the gaming house developed health issues directly related to the constant exposure of the temperature or the poor sanitation or the mold, but exposing them to the poor conditions for long periods of time and not taking proper action is still a serious issue within Australian law. Let's continue our journey through the dark, murky waters of the Tainted Minds excuses.
Your fault. Your fault. Your fault. Your fault.
Tainted Minds and even Riot Games Oceanic acknowledge some of the problems with the living conditions, but pass the blame onto the landlord from whom Tainted Minds was leasing the house from. Riot stated that the person at fault was the landlord for the problems with the house in the Tainted Minds ruling here. According to the Riot ruling, for 3 entire months, the most that Tainted Minds could do or be bothered to do to remedy the health and safety concerns of the players in the gaming house, which they considered to be the landlord's responsibilities, was send out some emails. I'm going to show you exactly why this excuse and their other excuses don't hold water and are complete bullshit.
Your fault. Your fault. Your fault. Your fault.
Businesses operating in New South Wales, Australia are lawfully held to certain duties to the workers that the business employs, as well as the workplace used to conduct the business. Under the Work Health and Safety Act we talked about earlier, a business must fulfill several duties to the workers, one of them being primary duty of care. The section on primary duty of care that states that a business must ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, the health and safety of workers engaging in the business in several capacities. Subsection 4 asserts that if A, a worker occupies accommodation that is owned by or under the management or control of the person conducting the business or undertaking, and B, the occupancy is necessary for the purpose of the worker's engagement because other accommodation is not reasonably available, the person conducting the business or undertaking must, so far as reasonably practicable, maintain the premises so the worker occupying the premises is not exposed to risk to health and safety. Let that sink in. A business must maintain premises of the business even if they're just renting or leasing the office or workplace. And think about it. A lot of businesses, if not most businesses around the world, are just renting or leasing their building or office space from a landlord or real estate company. It's not even so uncommon to see a small business using a rented house as an office. And I think according to Australian law, Tainted Minds upper management is absolutely in charge of maintaining the premises so that those in the workplace are not exposed to risk to health and safety. This would put health and safety liability directly on Tainted Minds upper management, not just the landlord. And I want to take a second just to clarify that weird phrase, reasonably practicable, just to make sure we're on the same page about what is and isn't expected of Tainted Minds upper management in this particular situation. If you go to the WorkSafe Australian website, they have really useful documents that help you interpret WorkSafe laws, one of which thoroughly explains the definition of what is reasonably practicable as is used in the context of work health and safety. Reasonably practicable means that which is, or at a particular time, reasonably able to be done to ensure health and safety, taking into account and weighing up all relevant matters including A, the likelihood of a hazard or risk occurring, B, the degree of harm that might result from the risk or hazard, or C, what the person concerned knows or ought to reasonably know about the risk or hazard, and ways of eliminating or minimizing the hazard. The interpretive document included this neat phrase: a duty holder must meet the standard of a behavior expected of a reasonable person in the duty holder's position who is required to comply with the same duty. Reasonable person. I'm gonna have to say that a reasonable person in the business of eSports would not falsely entice a bunch of young players to live in an unready, filthy gaming house with no working air conditioning during an intensely hot, humid Australian summer, and then temporarily deprive them of groceries because of a business planning failure. In my opinion, a reasonable person would absolutely do their best to remedy these conditions in a timely manner as opposed to allowing the premises to remain unkempt and unsafe for the workers. And they certainly wouldn't take several days to even respond to messages containing health or safety concerns and then push the blame onto the landlord. A reasonable person isn't going to want to live in those conditions, let alone impose them on someone else. The players were working and living in that particular house because Tainted Minds had obtained temporary ownership through a lease and wished to use the premises as an office for the players to practice. Thus, the responsibility and primary duty of care for the health and safety of the players, manager, and coach that are carrying out the business lies with Tainted Minds organization. That is not to say the landlord had no legal responsibility to the tenant, which in this case would be the Tainted Minds LLC, limited liability company. But it's important to view the respective business relationships the right way. The landlord of the property was renting it to the business of Tainted Minds. I believe Tainted Minds was using at least part of the Riot sanctioned housing stipend to pay for the housing in which they stationed the players, the coach, and the manager. Tainted Minds is paying the rent, not the players. When the players brought up the problems they had with the living conditions, they brought it up very early on to the upper management in Tainted Minds, but Tainted Minds dropped the ball big time. As the party paying the rent, Tainted Minds had way more rights to change things in the property than they realized. But instead of doing their due diligence, they failed to understand what they could and could not do to remedy the situation as soon as possible for those living and working in the gaming house. So what rights did Tainted Minds have as a housing tenant in this situation? This Australian website gives clear tenant rights and protocol to follow to get results quickly in disputes between tenants and landlords. There's a section regarding urgent repairs that states, quote, if the landlord or agent cannot be contacted or is unwilling to do urgent repairs or they're taking too long to do them, you can arrange for the repairs to be done yourself. The landlord is then obligated under law to pay you back up to $1,000 of repairs and within 14 days of your notice. Whoa. It's useful to know that if urgent repairs are needed, you don't have to wait an unreasonable amount of time for your landlord to do them. You can actually take matters into your own hands when urgency is considered. However, this right is likely granted to the person or business who signed the lease or rent agreement, aka Tainted Minds. Here's what falls under urgent repairs according to the site. Surprise, surprise, electrical problems and air conditioning problems both qualify as urgent repairs within Australian tenant and landlord laws. And upon further research, I found that a broken shower or systematic problems with laundry facilities in the house, both of which the players complained about the Tainted Minds, also fall under urgent repairs. Yeah, Tainted Minds couldn't pretend like they did everything they could as was reasonably practicable for workers, because for the entirety of 3 months, they never figured out that they could do more than just email the landlord and try to pass the blame onto him. Even for non-urgent repairs, there's a clear system in place to ensure that a landlord has to respond within a deadline, or you can begin to apply the Australian legal tribunal to enforce it. But I guess that just takes too much effort. Maybe if one of the higher-ups in Tainted Minds actually lived in the gaming house, then they would have a little more motivation than just send out a few emails. I mean, it's not like anyone important had valid health and safety concerns during the time period living and working in horrible conditions. And yeah, the landlord probably isn't blameless here, but guess what? Tainted Minds clearly could have done a lot more to ensure the safety and health of the workers, and they didn't. What's really frustrating is that much of this debacle could have been avoided entirely if Tainted Minds had fulfilled their obligation as the signing party renting or leasing a house to do an inspection of the premises. In fact, the landlord must give you a condition report when you move in, and it must be filled in by you and the landlord at the start and the end of the tenancy. You get 2 copies, one you get to keep, and one you must complete and return within 7 days. Fastfee said the following in a twit longer. A week and a half after moving in, it was brought to my attention that the initial inspection and documentation had not been completed. This was supposed to be filled in prior to moving in. No surprise, Tainted Minds fails again on their due diligence, which directly affects the health and safety of the players, manager, and coach. If the landlord does not give you a condition report, write a detailed report on the condition of the premises yourself and have a witness sign and date it. Inspect the premises and complete the report carefully. If the landlord undertakes to do cleaning, repairs, additions, or other work, write details in the section, landlords promise to undertake work. Wait, remember back to what was told to Cake right before he flew out to move into the gaming house. We were told by Tainted Minds that the house would be ready before we arrived, and even got confirmation a few days earlier. In this screenshot, Nick Anero Smith, the coach of the team, asked Joshua, the public relations manager of Tainted Minds, if everything, including the internet and air conditioning, was ready in the new house. Joshua responds, "Yep, pretty much so." Who answers such an important question like that besides a politician trying to dodge a question? Do you really think the players are lying about being told the house was ready and Tainted Minds actually said, "No, don't come. The house is filthy with missing bedroom doors and there's no working laundry or air conditioning"? I doubt it. The way I see it, they must have either not done an inspection of the house because they obviously didn't fill out the inspection report, or they willingly knew about the conditions and still gave the players the go-ahead to come and move in. Regardless, it's unprofessional and downright despicable. We clearly have multiple courses of action in which Tainted Minds could have clearly taken to help ensure the health and safety of the players, including doing the inspection report, fulfilling the inspection report requirements for the house, and using the renter's rights to make urgent repairs, and even taking the landlord to court if they failed to follow through on the repairs or promised repairs. This, to me, speaks of gross negligence, incompetence, and just failure to do the duty of care of a company. If these player statements are indeed true, then this could be a damning revelation. I think it's pretty clear that the players in this case did not fully know their rights, especially under this Work Health and Safety Act, which makes me feel sick because it feels like Tainted Minds indirectly took advantage of that. 3 of the players in the team were not even native to Australia. How likely do you think is it that a young imported player who's expected to be taken care of by their organization would fully know or understand their rights as a worker in a foreign country? Tainted Minds ignored repeatedly complaints from players and the support staff over their health and safety due to living conditions of the house. These complaints stretched for months. This is the path that the players and the coach and the managers needed to begin to take to see resolution with Tainted Minds, whether through governmental action or just to prove that they knew their rights and to force Tainted Minds to stop taking advantage of them. First, they had an option to elect a health safety representative within the business, who would essentially be a point person in dealing with health and safety issues, who would have the right to be included in all health and safety negotiations within the company. According to the law, at any time, a worker for a business may ask the person conducting the business to facilitate the conduction of an election for one or more health or safety representative to represent workers who carry out the work for the business. The person conducting the business must take all reasonable steps to commence negotiations with workers within 14 days after a request is made under Section 50. The person conducting the business must, if asked by a worker to negotiate with workers' representatives in negotiation under this section, and must not be excluded from representation from those negotiations. If we take a look at the maximum penalties here, we already see fines that significantly outweigh the pitiful fine that Riot Oceanic leveled against Tainted Minds. And these are just the fines for this one section regarding health and safety representatives, elections, and negotiations.
I'm on my way.
If the players had felt that the health and safety issues that they had presented to their organization had not been resolved, then they could have chosen to pursue a resolution by filing a formal complaint with the governmental health and safety regulator or inspector. The workers or elected health representatives would then have needed to contact a safe work regulator within their region, who would then have opened an investigation, potentially leading to them sending out an inspector to the location of the business, in which this case, the gaming house. I found the information necessary to contact them on the Australian government website. They list plenty of ways that the players or anyone in the region could get in contact with them, such as an email or phone number. So once someone in the regulator's office was contacted and the situation was explained, an inspector would likely be issued to the gaming house to draft evidence to begin to better understand the situation. And an inspector has quite a bit of power. Inspectors have the power to enter and search a place that they reasonably suspect is a workplace. They can even have search warrants issued for workplaces in uncooperative situations. And of course, impeding on an inspector to do his job or her job results in even more hefty fines. The inspection process would include interviewing the workers, inspecting anything and everything in the workplace, and recording all the evidence. From here, the inspector would report his or her findings to the regulator of the region, and for this act, they would begin the legal process of understanding the situation and whether or not to prosecute. The governmental prosecution process from here is quite bureaucratic, but at this point, it would be out of the hands of the players and into the hands of the Australian government. The main point is that the process of having health and safety regulators and inspectors is to have government employees assess these situations and make unbiased decisions based on evidence. This particular governmental service is for protection of the workers and the health and safety of everyone at the workplace.
Mundo say, you're fired!
It's also very important to note that workers are also granted the protection to cease work if they have a reason to be concerned for their health and safety. And if anyone was fired or threatened or had their position altered for bringing up health concerns, then that would fall under discriminatory conduct. Fastby's termination happened at a very suspicious time in the situation. She had been bringing up health and safety issues with upper management during the same time frame that she was fired. If found in a court of law that her termination was in part because of her bringing up these health and safety issues to upper management, then that would be considered discriminatory conduct under this act and a prohibited reason for termination, meaning it would be considered an unlawful and unfair dismissal, subject them, as in Tainted Minds, to heavy fines in a civil lawsuit. Fastby also openly testified that she was getting bullied into signing a much worse contract. She said that John McRae refused to pay her the money they owed unless she signed a contract that would alter her position and force her to work more hours, take on more responsibility, all without a pay increase. If that is found to be true in a court of law, then Tainted Minds is in some serious legal trouble. Not only is that illegal under this Work Safety Act, but it would expose Tainted Minds to even more broken laws under Australian Unfair Work Acts. The following is testimony from a phone interview I had with Fastby about this situation. She gave me permission to use this in the video.
Were you afraid that you would lose your job because of anything regarding this? Like, what was there like a fear?
Yeah, John a few times was like, "Don't test me," and he said it. John likes to bully people. He likes to bully people with his lawyer. He likes to pull people away and separate them from people, go for a walk or take them to have a drink, and then bully them. It's disgusting. He does it, and he threatens. He's like, "I'm not scared to take people to court. I will like do this if you play up." And essentially, in the end, I was like, "Yeah."
He said that
like to lots of people.
Who else did he say?
He tried to use an old thing as an example. He was like, this really famous person came and ate my thing that I was hosting in New Zealand, and he tried to sue us, and we won. So don't try.
What was he saying that?
Say. Huh?
When was that conversation, like timeline wise?
This was like, actually, yeah, it was after like I said something. Something happened within the house, and then John wanted to speak with me the next morning, and we had to go for a walk, and I had to be alone, away from everyone else. And it was a joke within the house, and I was getting in trouble.
What month was this?
And this would have been in December.
Oh, this is like right away.
Yeah, this was at the start. This was maybe like the third time I'd seen John.
So he was coming to the house,
Yeah, he lived in Sydney. He would come to the house.
and you would say, in your own words, that John would bully people. Do
Yeah,
you
100%.
feel
I would say
unsafe
that
around him?
constantly to anybody. Around John?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, like we sat down in meetings to discuss my contract, because that was a huge issue at the same time that was being juggled with all of these issues at the start. Because I decided to be like, look, I'm not doing a single thing outside of my contract anymore if you're not going to acknowledge me and pay me. So that's the situation that came out of that email, that 6,000-word email, and me sending an invoice. They were like, we're not paying this, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to work outside of my contract. That's how this works, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's fair. So I stopped doing a lot of work, which obviously created problems because I was doing a lot.
Right.
So on the side of it all, Tainted Minds and John were trying to change my contract. They were essentially putting the exact same contract in my face with different hours and different work for the same amount of money, which I was never going to sign, obviously. And he would bully me about that. So we ended up sitting down in McDonald's across the road and going through it all, and him agreeing that he would pay me like not even the full amount of money. We settled on an amount for the overtime worked in December, and then we would look into changing my contract so that it would better reflect what was required for the role or whatever else. But the entire time, like, he would just ignore the fact that and try very hard to not increase any pay. Yeah.
And that was
he would bully
8,000 a year
like that.
salary.
And yeah.
And so what type of overtime did he arrange? Was it like percentage based? Did he agree to do minimum wage or something?
No, he refused to acknowledge that I worked the amount of hours I did because it's unsafe working hours and it's too much for Australian law. Like, it's not legally allowed that I worked as much as I did.
Right. He can't. Like, from his point, if he acknowledges that, that's the first step.
Well, if he paid for that, then yeah, like, that's why he didn't do that. So he basically picked out like a full-time amount of hours and then said he'd pay for that.
Did you? Okay, so you signed that?
Well, yeah, I was going to go ahead. I was like, okay, well, I'm happy to settle with this. And then we would go and look at reworking the contract. But in the meeting, he was like, yes, okay, we've settled on this amount. We'll do this. And then we can then continue to work on figuring out the contract. And then after we left that conversation, this is where his bullying comes in. He all of a sudden changed it that I was not going to receive the money unless I signed the contract. And then he kept handing me these contracts, which were ridiculous. Ones that I just really would never sign. Yeah. So unless I signed something that I was, like, it was under duress, pretty much. Unless I signed something that would fuck me over, I was never going to receive that money.
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't have. He was definitely bullying.
Yeah. Like, it's disgusting. Like, the contract they handed me, right? They say that they treated me for my role and treated me as a professional. But this contract that they were trying to get you to sign went down to controlling what I wear within the house.
What you would wear?
Yeah, my wardrobe within the house. They were going to be able to control that. And then they also added in there that they were going to be able to tell me to wear cosplays at events. How the fuck is that a manager's role? They had never, ever spoken to me about my cosplaying. Yet it's in that contract all of a sudden. Like, I was just legitimately never going to sign that.
Wow.
So, yeah. I think that they were originally hoping that I would leave off that they were forcing me into a position where I had to leave. But yeah, I just stayed there until they terminated me. So yeah, essentially, I guess I felt unsafe the entire time because I knew that they just would not have my best interests.
I think it's clear from Fastfee's testimony that foul play was involved in this situation to a heavy degree. Penalties under this act for behavior of discriminatory conduct can be between $100,000 to $500,000. By the way, it's important to mention that this act cannot assist in a civil lawsuit unless it's in reference to Part 6 and Part 7 of this Work Safety Act. Part 6 was discriminatory conduct, which we just looked at. Riot not so subtly reminded us in the Tainted Minds ruling that everyone involved was held to their non-disclosure agreements, and they could face legal action if they broke it again. Neat little way for Riot to close the matter and sweep it under the rug, huh? But I will remind you that a non-disclosure agreement does not hold if laws were broken or illegal things took place. NDA laws are different everywhere, but generally speaking, in most places, if you can prove that offenses or illegal things took place, then you can break the NDA.
Must punish.
Okay, when you went to Riot, what did you specifically say? Was that about the work safety? Was that like when you went to Riot? Was one of the things that you stated to them involving like the players feeling unsafe or the environment in the house was putting people at risk? Like, was there any mention of that in those conversations that you had with Riot that your organization terminated you for?
Riot didn't want to speak about me at all. I was not allowed to speak to Riot. Like, myself and the coach emailed in the beginning of January about all of the issues we've been having, because at that time it was like a month and, things weren't being repaired. So the contracts were already in breach in our mind.
Yeah.
Because, the organization was not remedying the issues within 30 days. So we reached out to Riot because obviously, like, we all wanted to play together. We were all there. We were already there. We wanted this to work. So we reached out to Riot to see if they could help. And they legitimately would not help us unless one of the players emailed in. So since January, I've kind of been like excluded from everything. Riot won't speak to me.
Why do you think
they consider me part of the organization? They consider me part of the organization, and it's not their problem.
But like you're getting paid that $3,000 from Riot, but it goes through your organization first.
No, yeah, that's why they don't think it's from them. Because it's a support payment to the organization to use on what they see fit within management.
But so the conversations that you tried to have, whether they acknowledged it or not with Riot, were...
I got pulled up in an interview room with them for saying duty of care. I got pulled up with them. They're like, if you start using that word, we have to get a lawyer in here.
They said that?
I was like, I don't care. Yeah, they legitimately pulled me up. They said, if you continue to use those words, you are making an attack at the organization. We need to get a lawyer in here. And I was like, this is what is happening.
It just blows my mind that most of the discussions on this topic were primarily debating contract breaches or Riot Games' involvement, when player testimony and other available evidence both point to gross disregard for safety and welfare of the players, of the coach, of the manager. If everything we've heard from the players, the coach, and the manager thus far is true, then Tainted Minds hasn't just behaved in a morally reprehensible way, they failed their employees in ways that could be legally prosecuted by New South Wales, Australia. Obviously, I'm not a regulator of work safety in Australia. For me to say that these offenses and penalties absolutely apply to this situation is speculative opinion. It's almost like when Riot claimed, at no point do we believe that player safety was in jeopardy. The laws in this act are the guidelines that the regulators in Australia work through. With that in mind, let's move forward. In the Work Health and Safety Act, you'll find 3 categories of punishable offenses relating to failure to comply with health and safety duty, like primary duty of care. Category 1 offenses are the most severe, and Category 3 offenses are the least severe. Let's start with Category 3. A Category 3 offense would be if a person or business has a health and safety duty, they fail to comply with that duty, the maximum penalty here for an individual conducting a business is $100,000. A Category 2 offense has higher standards than a Category 3 offense. A Category 2 offense would be if there's a failure to comply with the health and safety duty and this failure exposes an individual to a risk of death or serious injury or illness. This is obviously much more severe, and the fines can be upwards to $300,000 for a business in this situation. Category 1 offenses are the most extreme under this act. A person who has a health and safety duty to their workers, and that person without reasonable excuse engages in conduct that exposes an individual to whom that duty is owed to a risk of death or serious injury or illness, and that person is reckless as to the risk to the individual of death or serious injury or illness. The maximum penalty in the case of a Category 1 offense committed by an individual as a person conducting a business or undertaking, or as an officer of the person conducting a business or undertaking, is $600,000, or 5 years imprisonment, or both. The prosecution bears the burden of proving that the conduct was engaged without reasonable excuse. I think the key words to this one are without reasonable excuse and reckless. And just so we're on the same page of what the definition of reckless is, without thinking or caring about the consequences of an action. It's not my place to claim absolutes. Maybe Tainted Minds would have not been prosecuted through work safety laws. Maybe a resolution could have been found between Tainted Minds upper management, the players, the coach, the manager, with the Australian work safety regulators arbitrating the situation. It's not my place to be the judge and jury for this prosecution. I'm just presenting to you what I found combined with testimony of those involved. I'm not the one who can legally say under law that those working in the gaming house were truly in a health-threatening situation. However, the word reckless really stuck with me after I read through it all for the first time. Whether or not those categories of punishments apply here, it's still my opinion that Tainted Minds upper management was acting recklessly about the health and safety of everyone in the gaming house throughout the duration of the time in the gaming house. And remember, the health protected under this act includes psychological health. Imagine how it would feel to be in the situation and to be unable to get a timely or helpful response from upper management who made promises to you. And then to have Riot, the company you went for, out of desperation, and they ignore your issues, make you jump through unnecessary hoops, postpone your arbitration, half-ass inspections, and then seemingly collude with your organization behind your back. If you don't think that would impact your psychological health, I don't really know what to tell you. I'm going to go back through and summarize quickly most of the offenses committed that are directly applicable to Australian laws already in place. Number 1, all throughout the situation with the players in the organization, a common factor was lack of timely responses to crucial health and safety concerns. Tainted Minds would take days or even sometimes weeks to acknowledge a health and safety concern. Tainted Minds upper management has a responsibility of due diligence to its workers. Due diligence means reasonable steps taken by a person in order to satisfy a legal requirement. This act ensures that officers, Australian lingo, aka for bosses, conducting the businesses have appropriate processes for receiving and considering information regarding incidents, hazards, and risk, and responding to it in a timely way, keyword being timely. Number 2, Tainted Minds upper management failed to inspect the gaming house and fill out a legally required inspection report of the house before signing the lease. Then they lied about the house being ready to the players who signed the contracts believing the house to be ready. This is contract fraud. Contract fraud occurs when one party in a contract presents information to another that is incorrect, deceitful, or meant to confuse the other party. But this is also a violation of primary duty of care under this Work Health Safety Act. This is also a violation of a duty of an officer within this act. Tainted Minds upper management failed due diligence to ensure that a person conducting the business or undertaking has and implements processes for complying with any duty or obligation of the person conducting the business or undertaking under this act. This would likely be considered reckless by a court of law. Number 3, Tainted Minds guaranteed to the players, coach, and manager that there would be air conditioning in the gaming house. Upon everyone moving in, there was not available air conditioning in the house. Contract fraud and compromising the health of those involved. Number 4, promising a $4,500 Lenovo Y900 Razer Edition PC given on arrival in the letter of engagement sent to everyone. That was promised. The contract had terms changed to high-end gaming PC given upon arrival. However, upon actual arrival, there was no high-end gaming PC. Weeks later, the players were furnished with used PCs of much lower value than the original promised models. Keyword being, they were used PCs. Some PCs couldn't even effectively run League of Legends without frequently crashing. What's the point of these PCs if they can't play on them? This is not only contract fraud and a contract breach, but this is textbook bait and switch in a contract proposal. All of these are separately serious and very much punishable in civil court. Number 5, Tainted Minds failed to take appropriate steps and precautions to help protect those working and living in the house from 3 different heat waves. No real contingencies were communicated or in place for emergencies. This is a failure of primary duty of care, putting the health and safety of those involved at risk. Number 6, Tainted Minds failed to adequately clean and maintain the premises as was their duty under this WorkSafe Act. Another violation of primary duty of care, exposing the player's coach and manager to health risk in the workplace. Number 7, the whole 10 days without groceries and terrible living conditions and accommodations could have even more consequences for Tainted Minds. The fact that there was a 17-year-old on the team, someone under 18, considered a minor, his name was Pradith, means Tainted Minds likely also broke the Children and Young Persons Act, Care and Protection, of 1998 for New South Wales, Section 228, Neglect of a Child and Young Persons. And I quote, a person, whether or not the parent of a child or young person, who without reasonable excuse neglects to provide adequate and proper food, nursing, clothing, medical aid, or lodging for a child or young person in his or her care is guilty of an offense. The definition of a young person in Australian law is someone who is older than 16, but under the age of 18. Pradith, 17 years old, is thrown into this hellish situation. We've already established the bad living conditions of the house, and on top of that, there was clearly a 10-day period of time in which food was not adequately provided, while the obligation and responsibility was on Tainted Minds as an organization. Obviously, the conditions and grocery situation violate the primary duty of care again. But if found guilty of neglect of a child or young person, that offense could carry another penalty of about $22,000. Number 8. Tainted Minds didn't do their due diligence on the landlord-tenant relationship by not only failing to inspect the property and fill out the proper paperwork, but also because they did not think to find out they could have even enacted the urgent repairs to the house's electrical problems and the cooling problems under the rights granted to the tenants in Australian law. I'm not sure whether this boils down to incompetence or negligence or both. Regardless, proper due diligence from Tainted Minds would have prevented many of these problems from escalating like they did. This is a violation of duty of an officer acting on behalf of Tainted Minds and Tainted Minds failing primary duty of care to exposing workers to health and safety risk. What was reasonably practicable by a reasonable person in this situation would have been to pursue fixing the work environment through legal given rights. Tainted Minds could have even taken the landlord to legal tribunals specifically for tenants and landlords and gotten these problems fixed very quickly. And last but certainly not least, number 9. Withheld payments, the bullying, the mistreatment, and the unfair dismissal of fast fee. This created the 10 days without groceries situation. This also created an extremely inappropriate work environment in which the players knew about the vicious contract bullying of a colleague, fast fee. This could be treated as a general threat and a psychological health threat to fast fee and even the other players and coach in the house who were bearing witness to the situation. Fast fee said she did not feel safe at any time during this time period while being threatened and bullied by John McRae and Tainted Minds upper management. Fast fee's firing was likely an unfair dismissal and could be considered discriminatory conduct, subjecting Tainted Minds to even more fines and opening them up to a civil lawsuit under unfair work laws and this Work Safety Act.
Mundo say greed is good.
I think right now is one of the most important times for the League of Legends community to really think about the direction that League is taking as a professional esport. If you care about any team or player in the region, you cannot let this topic slide like Riot has. We cannot allow the rising talent of our game to be exploited because if things like this are allowed to continue, it'll threaten esports as a whole. This player exploitation is not only morally reprehensible, but it should be considered absolutely intolerable by the community, the players, the team owners, and even Riot Games. If Riot claims to care so much about the community and the professional scene, why do they fight so hard against players having more rights? Players are treated as expendable when it's convenient to do so. Just look at the Renegades ruling in NA. They were all high and mighty about player rights when it was convenient for them to get rid of owners they didn't like. Look at this quote. Allowing an unsafe environment to exist for players is the responsibility of the entire Renegades management and is a failure to meet the professional standards we expect of LCS owners and team representatives. Oh wow, this competitive ruling is really all about player rights. Riot actually stood behind that statement in the Renegades ruling. Why is this standard of safety being ignored in the Tainted Minds ruling then? The players publicly spoke out about their mistreatment and there's evidence to back it up. Riot can't pretend to uphold this golden standard of player protection and rights and then flippantly ignore player rights when it's convenient to not be liable for it. Riot needs to come together with all branches of its operations and actually set universal regulations and standards in contractual agreements with all the organizations. And their required responsibilities and duties to uphold need to be to the players, but also to the coaches and the managers in these situations. There should be in writing rights and protections in place for the players, the coaches, the managers, and the professional League of Legends scene that prevents any future situation from being like this and ever happening again. Without contractual expected rights, there's this gray area that Riot and organizations can function in that allows them to shirk responsibilities that are crucial to the livelihood of players, coaches, and managers. No more bullshit. Riot, you sell this fantastic dream of being a pro player to the community. It's so good. And even I believed it. Anyone can do it, you say. Anyone can be a pro player and succeed if you're good enough. Just get high rank, join a team, compete, win, and fame and fortune will come your way. You don't tell them the whole story. You're actively misleading a young, impressionable audience into horrible situations, and then you turn your backs on them. You don't tell them the stories of how organizations can get away with disgusting mistreatment of players. You don't tell the stories of talented players that have their careers ruined because they signed the wrong contract with the wrong organization. You don't tell the stories of the coaches and managers who hold a critical role in the success of players. And you give coaches and managers even less protection than the players. If we aren't especially harsh towards organizations that take advantage of players, coaches, and managers, then it will continue to happen and it will affect future esports. To be knowledgeable of wrongdoing while in a position of power and to allow it to continue without obstruction is to be complicit in the wrongdoing. I think the most important thing to take away from this video is that Riot Games is not the ultimate authority. We should not look to them as the ultimate authority on rulings such as this. They can make their rulings on the topic, but no one should ever have to stop at Riot's rulings. If you are in a questionable situation and you think laws are or were being broken, you should seek the counsel of a lawyer and find your rights that are entitled to you from your government. These rights are plentiful in the first world countries because businesses have been trying to exploit workers since longer than we've been alive. We should never let a shady organization within League of Legends get away with something like this ever again. But let me leave you with this last thought. If you need a personal lawyer in order for you not to be taken advantage of in the challenger leagues or the pro scene, as a player, a coach, or a manager, what do you do if you don't have a lot of money? What do you do if your organization is mistreating you and just decides not to pay you or not to uphold your contract? You can't depend on Riot Games to protect you. How do you win a legal battle against an organization that has more power and money, even if they're absolutely in the wrong? Why does Riot take a back seat in some situations and not others? Why do they insist on maintaining such tight control over League as an esport and yet give so much power and trust to organizations when there's so much room for an organization to take advantage of the players, the coaches, and the managers?